The silence between your heartbeats is where the ghost of your potential goes to die. You believe you are the architect of your life, but look closer at the blueprint, and you will find it was drafted by a stranger you have never actually met. This internal adversary does not arrive with a scream or a flourish. It settles into your marrow like a slow-acting poison, convincing you that its toxic influence is merely your own natural temperament. When you hesitate to speak in a crowded room or retreat from a challenge that sets your pulse racing, you call it caution, but it is actually the cold grip of a parasite that feeds on your uncertainty. It operates in the dark spaces of your subconscious, filtering every perception and every dream through a lens of inherent inadequacy until you can no longer distinguish between your authentic soul and the cage you have built around it. This is the ultimate psychological deception, a silent enemy that masquerades as your own survival instinct while it systematically dismantles every bridge to the greatness you were promised at birth. You are not living your life. You are merely reacting to the fears of a younger version of yourself that never learned how to be brave. The tragedy of the modern human condition is that we have become so accustomed to the weight of our own chains that we mistake the friction of the iron for the warmth of a steady hand. You think you are protecting yourself from the judgment of others, but the harshest judge has already moved inside and is currently redecorating your mind with the furniture of failure. It is time to wake up to the reality that your personality is often just a collection of sophisticated defense mechanisms. The mirror is the greatest liar in your house because it only reflects the physical shell while hiding the structural rot that is hollowing out your spirit. Most people spend their entire lives in a state of profound emotional blindness, mistaking their self-sabotage for a series of unfortunate coincidences or the inevitable cruelty of fate. You tell yourself that you are just a private person, or that you prefer to stay in your comfort zone because you value peace. But in the sterile laboratory of the mind, these are simply clinical symptoms of a deep-seated insecurity that has hijacked your nervous system. Every time you downplay an achievement or settle for a relationship that leaves you feeling half alive, you are paying a hidden tax to an internal tyrant. This conditioning is so seamless that it feels as natural as breathing, a rhythmic cycle of doubt that prevents you from ever reaching the edge of your own capabilities. We are experts at rationalizing our cowardice, dressing it up in the fine robes of humility or the sharp suit of pragmatism. But beneath the costume is a trembling child who is terrified of being seen. This is not just a lack of confidence. It is a fundamental disruption of your identity that convinces you that the shadows on the wall are the only truth you will ever know. You have become an accomplice in your own stagnation, nodding in agreement with the voice that whispers you are not enough, never realizing that the voice is an echo of a past that no longer exists. To truly see yourself is to acknowledge that the person you think you are is often just a shadow cast by the things you are too afraid to do. The first step toward freedom is admitting that you are currently a prisoner of a war you did not even realize you were fighting against your own reflection. Consider the terrifying possibility that your best traits are actually clever disguises for your deepest wounds. You pride yourself on being a perfectionist, but what if that is just a frantic attempt to avoid the stinging pain of criticism? You claim to be an overachiever, but perhaps you are simply running away from a core belief that you are worthless unless you are performing for an audience. This is the insidious nature of the silent enemy. It turns your virtues into weapons of self-destruction and makes you work twice as hard for half the fulfillment. You are trapped in a feedback loop of your own making, where every success is immediately discounted and every failure is magnified until it fills the entire horizon of your future. We call this personality, we call it our nature, but it is actually a form of psychological scar tissue that has grown over the parts of us that were once vibrant and unafraid. The patterns of your life are not written in the stars. They are etched into the pathways of your brain by years of avoiding the things that make you uncomfortable. You have developed a sophisticated internal radar that detects any hint of vulnerability and shuts it down before it can blossom into strength, leaving you in a state of perpetual emotional stasis. This is the quiet death of the spirit, a gradual erosion of the self that happens while you are busy making plans and checking boxes. You have been conditioned to believe that staying small is the only way to stay safe, but safety is just a polite word for the coffin you are currently building for your dreams. The reality you inhabit is a narrow corridor of your own design, and the walls are closing in with every decision you make based on a fear you cannot name, but can always feel. To end the reign of this internal predator, you must first learn to look directly into the sun of your own shame without blinking. Strong people are not those who lack insecurity. They are the ones who have decoded the language of their own self-doubt and realized it is nothing more than a series of outdated survival commands. You must become a forensic investigator of your own behavior, questioning every impulse and dissecting every hesitation until you find the hidden thread of insecurity that pulls the strings. The moment you realize that your internal narrative is a fiction designed to keep you manageable is the moment the cage door swings open. It will be disturbing to realize how much of your life has been a performance for a ghost. But this discomfort is the only fire that can forge a new identity. You are not your conditioning. You are not your past mistakes. And you are certainly not the limited version of yourself that your fear has tried to sell you. Breaking the cycle requires a brutal honesty that most people are too terrified to even attempt, as it demands that you incinerate the familiar version of yourself to make room for a person who is truly free. The process of ending your insecurities is not about building a shield. It is about realizing you no longer need one, because the world cannot hurt you more than you have already hurt yourself through self-betrayal. This is the beginning of your liberation, a cold and calculated reclamation of your own mind from the forces that have held it hostage since you were old enough to care what others think. You are standing at the threshold of a terrifying and beautiful transformation, where the silent enemy is finally silenced by the roar of your own awakening. The path forward is through the darkness, armed with the knowledge that the only thing you have to lose is a version of yourself that was never real to begin with. You were born as a masterpiece of pure potential, a blank canvas of raw consciousness that knew nothing of hesitation or the suffocating weight of self-doubt. Insecurity is not a biological inheritance. It is a meticulously constructed architectural failure, built brick by brick through years of subtle conditioning and overt emotional trauma. Imagine your mind as a pristine garden where the first seeds of inadequacy were planted by a careless word from a parent, a cold shoulder from a peer, or the sharp sting of a public failure. These early experiences act as the foundation for a structure you never asked to build, yet one you inhabit every single day of your adult life. The brain, in its desperate and misguided attempt to protect you from future pain, begins to archive every instance of rejection as a survival blueprint, teaching you that staying small is the only way to remain safe. This is the birth of the internal critic, a voice that was originally an external observation but has since been internalized until it sounds exactly like your own thoughts. You were not born fearing the judgment of the world. You were taught to fear it by an environment that prioritized conformity over authenticity and safety over growth. The architecture of your current identity is largely composed of these borrowed fears, a complex web of defensive reactions that have fossilized into what you now call your personality. This chapter is the autopsy of that construction process, a deep dive into the specific mechanics of how your spirit was convinced to surrender its natural brilliance in favor of a dim and flickering light. You must understand that the walls closing in on you were built by hands other than your own, and only by recognizing the blueprints can you begin the necessary work of demolition. The childhood home is often the primary laboratory where the chemistry of insecurity is first synthesized, transforming innocent curiosity into a lifelong habit of walking on eggshells. Long before you had the intellectual capacity to process nuance, your nervous system was recording the frequency of your environment, noting every time love was made conditional or attention was used as a weapon of control. A child's mind is a relentless meaning-making machine, and when it encounters emotional volatility or neglect, it rarely blames the adult. Instead, it concludes that it must be inherently flawed to deserve such treatment. These early emotional wounds are not merely memories. They are structural integrity issues that dictate how you handle pressure and intimacy decades later. We carry these invisible scars into our relationships and our boardrooms, reacting to a boss or a partner as if they were the ghost of a disappointed father or an indifferent mother. This is the phenomenon of emotional anchoring, where a single moment of profound shame becomes the gravity that pulls every future achievement back down to earth. You may have traveled thousands of miles and earned a dozen titles, but if the foundational belief of your childhood was that you are an inconvenience, you will still apologize for taking up space in a room you paid to be in. The mind stores these ancient hurts in a vault of high-security cellular memory, playing them back on a loop every time you reach for something better. We are all walking museums of our unhealed experiences, displaying the artifacts of our past rejections as if they were current truths about our value. To break the cycle, you must stop viewing your self-image as a reflection of reality and start seeing it as a curated collection of survival strategies that have long since outlived their original and desperate purpose. In the digital age, the construction of insecurity has moved from the private home to the global arena, where the poison of comparison is injected directly into our veins every hour of the day. Social rejection is no longer a localized event. It is a constant, ambient threat that keeps our brains in a state of high-alert hypervigilance. When you scroll through the curated highlights of 1,000 strangers, your subconscious is performing a brutal and unfair calculation, measuring your messy behind-the-scenes reality against their polished and filtered stage production. This constant state of relative deprivation creates a vacuum in the soul, a feeling of being perpetually behind in a race that has no finish line and no clear rules. Your brain interprets this lack of digital validation as a literal threat to your survival, triggering the same ancient fear of being cast out from the tribe to perish in the wilderness. The repetition of this exposure creates a neurochemical groove, a pathway of least resistance that leads directly to the conclusion that you are fundamentally insufficient compared to the collective. We have traded our internal compass for a series of external metrics, allowing the fickle algorithms of social approval to dictate our sense of worthiness. This is how belief systems are solidified, not through a single dramatic event, but through the relentless drip feed of micro-comparisons that erode your confidence until there is nothing left but a hollow shell of performative identity. You have been conditioned to believe that your value is a fluctuating currency, subject to the whims of a market you can never control and a crowd that doesn't actually exist. The repetition of these social wounds creates a psychological callus, a thickening of the ego that prevents you from feeling the very joy you are working so hard to project to the world around you. The ultimate tragedy of the human mind is how it eventually takes the lead in its own imprisonment, turning a series of external events into a permanent internal identity. Belief is nothing more than a thought you have repeated until your nervous system accepts it as a physical law, much like gravity or the rising of the sun. Once a belief is established, the mind becomes a master of confirmation bias, actively seeking out evidence that supports your inadequacy while aggressively filtering out any proof of your greatness. You do not see the world as it is. You see it through the thick, distorted glass of your accumulated insecurities, which makes every opportunity look like a trap and every compliment sound like a lie. This self-perpetuating cycle is how a single emotional wound becomes a lifelong personality trait, as the mind seeks to protect its established narrative at all costs. You say, "I am an anxious person," or "I am bad with people." But these are not facts. They are merely the habitual conclusions of a brain that has been trained to expect failure. This conditioning creates a feedback loop where your beliefs dictate your actions, and your actions produce results that reinforce your original, flawed beliefs. To change your life, you must first hack the internal software that has been running on autopilot since your youth, exposing the logical fallacies that underpin your self-doubt. The persona you present to the world is often just a sophisticated mask worn by a frightened ego, a costume designed to hide the very wounds that need the most light. True strength is not the absence of these patterns, but the conscious decision to stop identifying with them, recognizing that the narrator in your head is often an unreliable witness to your true potential. You are the observer of the thoughts, not the thoughts themselves. And the moment you create that distance is the moment the construction of your insecurity begins to crumble under the weight of the truth. The architecture of your misery is built upon a foundation of lies that you have defended with more loyalty than you have ever shown your own dreams. Every morning you wake up and put on a suit of armor made of fabrications, convincing yourself that you are protecting your heart when you are actually suffocating your soul. You tell yourself that you are not ready, that you lack the necessary pedigree, or that your past mistakes have permanently disqualified you from a seat at the table of greatness. These are not objective observations of reality. They are sophisticated psychological defense mechanisms designed to keep you safe from the terrifying vulnerability of actually trying. Your mind has become a master of the internal propaganda machine, repeating the same toxic scripts until they have the weight of scripture in your subconscious. You claim to be a realist when you are actually just a professional pessimist, dressing up your fear in the dignified robes of pragmatism so you don't have to face the shame of your own stagnation. The voice in your head that whispers you are a fraud is not an intuition. It is a ghost from a moment of rejection that you have allowed to take up permanent residence in your identity. We accept these lies because they are comfortable, providing us with a convenient excuse to stay exactly where we are while the world passes us by. You have become so addicted to the narrative of your own limitation that you treat the truth like an intrusive enemy. It is time to recognize that the most dangerous person in your life is the one currently speaking to you from behind your own eyes, spinning a web of inadequacy that has no basis in the physical world. Your self-talk is not a reflection of who you are. It is a repetitive broadcast of who you were told to be by people who were just as broken and afraid as you are today. The most insidious deception you harbor is the belief that your worth is a variable quantity that fluctuates based on your performance or the approval of others. You have allowed yourself to be convinced that you are a project to be fixed rather than a human being to be realized, creating a perpetual state of internal debt that can never be fully repaid. This false narrative of conditional value is a parasite that feeds on your every achievement, ensuring that no matter how much you win, you still feel like you are losing. Your mind protects the core of your pain by creating a distraction of endless self-improvement, making you believe that if you could just fix one more flaw, you would finally be worthy of respect. This is the ultimate lie of the ego. The idea that your potential is a destination you haven't reached yet, rather than a fundamental truth that exists within you right now. You view your abilities through a cracked mirror of past shames, magnifying every shortcoming while completely airbrushing your strengths out of the frame. This distortion is a deliberate act of self-sabotage, a way to ensure that the bar is always set just high enough to be out of reach so you never have to deal with the pressure of actually grasping it. Shame is the ink that writes the most convincing lies in your internal diary, telling you that your secrets make you unlovable and your scars make you ugly. You have repeated these falsehoods for so long that the neural pathways in your brain have become highways for self-loathing, making it easier to hate yourself than to challenge the narrative. The reality is that you are not your trauma, and you are certainly not the opinions of people who don't even know their own names. To wake up is to realize that the person you have been apologizing for is a fictional character created by a frightened mind trying to survive a storm that ended years ago. Fear is the ghostwriter of your life story, and it has spent years convincing you that the shadows in the corner are monsters waiting to devour you. You have been told that your sensitivity is a weakness, that your ambition is a delusion, and that your need for connection is a liability. These are the defensive lies of a world that is terrified of anyone who cannot be easily categorized or controlled. When you believe that you are fundamentally broken, you stop looking for the exit and start decorating your cell, accepting a life of quiet desperation as your inevitable fate. The mind is a brilliant architect of excuses, building elaborate justifications for why you shouldn't speak up, why you shouldn't leave, and why you should just be grateful for the crumbs you are offered. This emotional conditioning creates a false ceiling on your potential, a psychological barrier that feels as solid as concrete but is actually as thin as smoke. You have been trained to ignore the evidence of your own resilience, focusing instead on the times you tripped as if they were the only moments that defined the journey. This is how the silent enemy maintains its grip. It makes the truth feel like a dangerous lie and the lie feel like a safe harbor. You believe that if you stop being hard on yourself, you will lose your edge, but the opposite is true. Your self-criticism is the very thing blunting your soul and keeping you from the sharp, clear action required for mastery. The shame you carry is a borrowed garment that you were never meant to wear, yet you have tailored it to fit so perfectly that you can no longer feel where it ends and you begin. It is a confrontational truth to realize that you have been your own jailer, but it is also the only realization that can set you free from the prison of your own making. The moment of awakening comes when you realize that your identity is not a stone monument, but a fluid story that you have the power to rewrite in this very second. The lies you keep believing about yourself only have power as long as they remain unexamined in the basement of your subconscious. When you bring them into the light of conscious awareness, they begin to dissolve like mist under a morning sun. You must develop a radical intolerance for the internal dialogue that seeks to diminish you, treating every self-depleting thought as a hostile intruder rather than a familiar friend. The process of ending your insecurities requires you to incinerate the old version of yourself, letting the false beliefs burn away so that the underlying truth can finally emerge. You are not the product of what has happened to you. You are the product of the meaning you have chosen to give those events. Strong people do not have fewer insecurities. They simply have a different relationship with the truth, refusing to let the echoes of the past dictate the music of the future. You must stop waiting for a permission slip that is never coming and start claiming the space that was always yours to inhabit. The narrative of your unworthiness is a house of cards held together by the glue of your own compliance, and it only takes one breath of honest self-recognition to bring the whole structure down. You have been living a small life because you were sold a small map, but the territory of your potential is vast and uncharted, waiting for you to stop believing the lies and start walking into the unknown. This is the end of the deception and the beginning of the discipline required to live as a person who is no longer at war with their own reflection. The truth will not make you comfortable, but it will make you formidable, and that is the only thing that matters in the pursuit of a life worth living. The modern world has transformed the human heart into a competitive arena where your worth is measured by a yardstick you did not create and can never actually satisfy. Comparison is the silent thief that enters your mind under the guise of inspiration, but leaves only the wreckage of your self-esteem in its wake. You have been conditioned to treat your life as a performance to be evaluated rather than a journey to be lived, turning every interaction into a subtle calculation of status and standing. This constant internal monitoring creates a state of perpetual emotional unrest, a low-grade fever of inadequacy that burns through your confidence before you even step out of bed. We have moved from comparing ourselves to the neighbor next door to measuring our raw, unedited reality against the highly curated highlights of 8 billion strangers. This is a mathematical impossibility and a psychological catastrophe that distorts your perception of what it means to be successful or happy. You are attempting to compete with a mirage, a digital hallucination that has been filtered, cropped, and edited to remove the very humanity that makes a life authentic. This process does not just make you feel bad. It systematically deconstructs your identity, replacing your internal compass with a desperate need for external benchmarks. You have become a ghost in your own story, haunting the peripheries of other people's successes while ignoring the fertile ground beneath your own feet. The urgency of this crisis cannot be overstated because every moment you spend looking at someone else's garden is a moment your own soul goes untended. You are trading your unique signature for a blurred copy of a life that doesn't even exist behind the screen, and the cost of this trade is the slow and painful death of your original spirit. The digital landscape has weaponized the human need for belonging, turning it into a validation addiction that keeps your nervous system in a state of constant, twitching dissatisfaction. You find yourself scrolling through an endless feed of filtered perfection, each swipe acting as a micro-injection of shame that reinforces the lie that you are falling behind. This is the new architecture of insecurity, built on a foundation of algorithms designed to exploit your deepest fears of being irrelevant or invisible. Your mind has become a house of mirrors where every reflection is distorted by the achievements of others, leaving you unable to see the true shape of your own progress. We have forgotten how to celebrate our quiet victories because they don't look spectacular in a square frame or garner the immediate rush of 1,000 hearts. This emotional dissatisfaction is not a byproduct of your failure. It is a direct result of your constant exposure to an unrealistic standard that was designed to be unattainable. You are chasing a ghost through a digital fog, convinced that if you could just reach that level of aesthetic or financial perfection, the void inside you would finally close. But the void is not caused by a lack of status. It is caused by the abandonment of your own path in favor of a crowded highway leading nowhere. The more you seek validation from the crowd, the more you lose the ability to validate yourself, creating a dependency that makes you a slave to the opinions of people who are just as insecure as you are. This is a cycle of emotional poverty that leaves you feeling bankrupt despite any material success you might achieve. It is a slow-motion car crash of the ego, where the only thing being destroyed is your capacity for genuine contentment and peace. Identity is a fragile thing, and when you subject it to the relentless pressure of constant comparison, it eventually fractures into 1,000 pieces of social performance. You no longer know what you actually want because your desires have been hijacked by the aesthetic trends of the season and the hollow victories of your peers. This is how comparison steals your soul. It replaces your authentic voice with a rehearsed script designed to win approval from a gallery of strangers. You have entered an insecurity loop where your self-worth is tied to a fluctuating market of social relevance, leaving you perpetually anxious and profoundly disconnected from your true self. The pain of this existence is often masked by a frantic pursuit of more, as if a higher salary or a better body could ever compensate for a lack of internal grounding. You are living in a state of emotional exile, cast out from the sanctuary of your own skin because you find it too uncomfortable to inhabit a body that doesn't look like a magazine cover. This displacement of the self is the ultimate tragedy of the modern era, a quiet genocide of individuality that happens one comparison at a time. You tell yourself that you are just being ambitious or that you are using others as motivation. But if the result is a feeling of bitterness and exhaustion, then it is not motivation, it is poison. The urge to measure yourself against another is a betrayal of the unique struggle that formed you and the specific purpose that is waiting for you to claim it. Every time you say, "I wish I had what they have," you are telling your own story that it is not good enough to be told, effectively silencing the only melody you were born to play in this world. To end the destruction of comparison is to commit to a radical act of self-reclamation that will feel like pulling a jagged shard of glass from your own heart. It requires the uncomfortable realization that you have been a willing participant in your own diminishment, sacrificing your peace for the sake of a competition that has no prize. You must develop a fierce and protective boundary around your attention, recognizing that where you look is what you become. Strong people do not live in a vacuum, but they have developed a psychological immunity to the noise of the crowd, understanding that their lane is the only one that matters. The moment you stop looking sideways is the moment you finally find the power to move forward with a clear and unwavering focus. This awakening is emotional and urgent because your time is a finite resource that is currently being bled dry by the phantom of other people's lives. You must reclaim the right to define your own success, even if it looks like a failure to those who are still trapped in the loop. The freedom that comes from this detachment is staggering, a sudden lightness that allows you to breathe for the first time in years. You are not a statistic, you are not a profile, and you are certainly not a lesser version of anyone else on this planet. You are a singular event in the history of the universe, and to compare yourself to another is to commit a profound act of disrespect against the very force that created you. It is time to close the tabs, put down the phone, and look directly into the mirror until the person looking back is the only one whose opinion truly matters. The war with the world ends the moment you decide that being yourself is not a consolation prize, but the ultimate victory in a life that was always meant to be yours alone. The ghost of other people's opinions is the most effective prison guard ever devised, and you have been handing it the keys to your life every single day. We walk through the world in a state of constant, low-level panic, our internal sensors perpetually scanning the environment for any hint of disapproval or the sharp sting of a critical glance. This fear of judgment is not a personality trait. It is a sophisticated survival mechanism that has been weaponized against your own authenticity, turning your every move into a calculated performance. You have become an expert in the art of social camouflage, blending into the expectations of the crowd to avoid the perceived danger of standing out. When you choose your words based on how they will be received rather than what they actually mean, you are committing a quiet act of self-betrayal that erodes the very foundation of your character. This psychological bondage forces you to live in a state of perpetual hesitation, a frozen moment between the impulse to act and the terror of being seen. You have allowed the hypothetical whispers of strangers to dictate the trajectory of your career, the depth of your relationships, and the very clothes you wear. We call this social awareness, but it is actually a form of emotional paralysis that keeps your soul in a permanent crouch. The tragedy is that the jury you are so desperately trying to please is made up of people who are far too preoccupied with their own failures to even notice yours. You are sacrificing your limited time on Earth to appease a gallery of ghosts, trading your genuine power for a temporary and hollow safety that will never satisfy the hunger in your spirit for true expression. Society functions as a massive, invisible conditioning machine that prioritizes the comfort of the collective over the truth of the individual, training you from birth to value perception over reality. From the classroom to the boardroom, the message is relentless and clear. To be accepted is to be safe, and to be safe is to be invisible. You have been taught to view criticism as a lethal threat rather than a mere opinion, causing your nervous system to react to a negative comment with the same intensity as a physical assault. This artificial environment forces you to develop a fragmented identity, a series of masks that you rotate depending on who is watching, until you can no longer remember which version of yourself is the original. You are living for the credits of a movie that no one is actually watching, exhausting your mental energy on a public relations campaign for a self that doesn't truly exist. This obsession with external validation creates a profound emotional blindness, where you become so focused on the radar of other people's reactions that you lose all contact with your own internal guidance. We have been conditioned to believe that our value is something granted by the tribe rather than something inherent in our existence, leaving us in a state of permanent vulnerability. This fear creates a society of hollow shells, people who are terrified of their own shadows because they have been told that light is only for those who follow the script. The urgency of this realization is the only thing that can break the spell, forcing you to confront the fact that you have been living a life that belongs to everyone but you. You are a prisoner of a social contract you never signed, and the only way out is to stop caring about the applause of people you don't even respect. Every missed opportunity in your life can be traced back to a moment where the fear of judgment whispered that it wasn't worth the risk of being laughed at or misunderstood. You have allowed the specter of "what will they think" to act as a ceiling on your potential, preventing you from ever reaching the heights of your own capabilities. This suppressed identity is like a coiled spring that is losing its tension, a vital energy that is being wasted on the maintenance of a respectable facade. You hesitate to start the business, to write the book, or to tell someone you love them because you are terrified of the vulnerability that comes with being fully exposed. This fear creates a life of safe, predictable paths that lead to a destination called regret, a place where the ghosts of the versions of yourself you were too afraid to become come to haunt your final days. You have been sold a lie that says a quiet life of conformity is the price of peace. But true peace only comes from the alignment of your internal truth with your external actions. The suppression of your identity is a slow-acting poison that manifests as chronic anxiety, a feeling that something is fundamentally wrong even when everything on the surface looks perfect. You are a masterpiece that is being hidden in a basement because you are worried about the dust, never realizing that the purpose of a work of art is to be seen and felt, regardless of the reaction it provokes. The world does not need more polite echoes. It needs original voices that are willing to be jarring, uncomfortable, and unapologetically real. The moment you stop seeking permission to exist is the moment you finally begin to live, breaking the cycle of hesitation that has kept you tethered to a version of yourself that is far too small for the spirit that inhabits it. True liberation begins with the brutal and beautiful realization that no one is actually thinking about you as much as you think they are, and even if they were, their thoughts have no power over your heartbeat. Strong people have made peace with being the villain in someone else's story, understanding that to be truly alive is to be controversial to those who are still asleep. You must develop a radical indifference to the binary of praise and blame, recognizing that both are equally fickle and ultimately irrelevant to the work of your soul. This is not about being cold or arrogant. It is about being so deeply rooted in your own truth that the winds of external opinion cannot shake your foundation. When you stop living for perception, you reclaim an incredible amount of wasted energy that can finally be poured into the pursuit of excellence and the realization of your highest self. The fear of judgment is a paper tiger that only has power as long as you refuse to walk through it. But once you cross that threshold, you find a world of limitless color and opportunity waiting on the other side. You are the only person who will be present for every second of your life. And to spend even one of those seconds living for someone else's approval is a profound waste of the miracle of your consciousness. The mask you have been wearing is heavy, and the relief of letting it fall is a sensation of freedom that cannot be described, only experienced. You are finally allowed to be loud, to be wrong, to be messy, and to be brilliant without asking for anyone's consent. This is the end of the control, the death of the spectator, and the birth of a person who is no longer afraid to be seen exactly as they are. The mirror no longer holds a stranger, and the world no longer holds a cage, because the silent enemy of judgment has been defeated by the simple, unwavering truth of your own presence. The architecture of your mind is not a fixed monument, but a living landscape carved by the relentless flow of your daily repetitions. Weak thinking is not a character flaw you were born with. It is a neurological groove, a path of least resistance that your brain has deepened every time you chose the comfort of a lie over the friction of the truth. Every time you tell yourself that you cannot handle a challenge or that you are inherently less capable than those around you, you are firing a specific sequence of neurons that eventually becomes an automatic reflex. Your brain is a masterpiece of efficiency, and it does not distinguish between a thought that empowers you and a thought that destroys you. It simply seeks to automate whatever you feed it most frequently. This is the biological reality of how insecurity becomes a habit, a physiological transformation where your self-doubt moves from a conscious choice to a subconscious command. You are currently operating on an internal software that was written during your moments of greatest weakness, and because you have never bothered to debug the code, you accept its glitches as part of your natural identity. We mistake these habitual neural pathways for our true personality, never realizing that what we call ourselves is often just a collection of practiced fears and rehearsed limitations. The mind is a neutral servant that will build a palace or a prison based entirely on the blueprints you provide through your internal monologue. You must confront the terrifying truth that you have been training yourself to be weak for years, one thought at a time, until the weight of your own conditioning feels like the natural gravity of your soul. To change your life is to first acknowledge that your brain has been hijacked by its own desire for efficiency, turning your temporary insecurities into a permanent and destructive mental infrastructure. The addiction to comfort is the primary fuel for the habit of weak thinking, creating a sterile environment where your potential is allowed to wither in the shade of safety. Your brain is biologically wired to seek the path of least resistance, a survival instinct that was useful in the wilderness but is catastrophic in the pursuit of greatness. Every time you avoid a difficult conversation, retreat from a bold opportunity, or succumb to the urge to hide, you are reinforcing a feedback loop that equates safety with stagnation. This avoidance behavior creates a psychological dependency on your own insecurity, as the mind learns to use fear as a convenient excuse to stay within the narrow confines of the known. You have normalized a state of low-level anxiety and self-sabotage because the alternative, the raw and unrefined effort of growth, feels like a threat to your nervous system. We have become experts at intellectualizing our cowardice, calling it patience or humility, while we silently feed the beast of our own inadequacy. This habitual comfort-seeking creates a mental callus that prevents you from feeling the sharp, clarifying pain of necessity, leaving you in a state of perpetual emotional numbness. You are not stuck. You are just extremely well practiced at staying still, and the more you repeat this behavior, the more your brain believes that you are incapable of moving. This is how the spirit is broken, not through a single traumatic event, but through 1,000 tiny concessions to the desire for ease. You have allowed your survival instincts to become the architect of your destiny, never realizing that the walls you built to keep the world out have actually kept your true self trapped inside a cycle of mediocrity. The urgency of this realization is the only thing that can break the spell, forcing you to look at your daily habits and see them for what they truly are, a slow-motion suicide of the spirit. Identity is nothing more than the cumulative result of what your mind repeats daily, a story you have told yourself so many times that you have forgotten you are the author. When your internal narrative is dominated by the language of weakness, using words like should, can't, or maybe, you are literally sculpting the shape of your soul into a form that is too small for your ambitions. This emotional dependency on insecurity is a subtle trap, as the mind begins to derive a perverse sense of comfort from its own suffering, finding safety in the predictable rhythm of failure. You have become a spectator of your own life, watching your decisions being made by a committee of past traumas and current fears that you have allowed to take the wheel. This is the phenomenon of learned helplessness, where the repetition of negative thoughts creates a mental paralysis that makes the exit door look like a solid wall. You have been conditioned to believe that your worth is a fixed commodity rather than a dynamic force that is generated through action and discipline. The habits of your mind are the invisible hands that guide every decision you make, from the people you associate with to the risks you are willing to take for your dreams. If you do not consciously choose the thoughts that form your identity, the world and your own biological impulses will choose them for you, and they will rarely choose greatness. We are the products of our internal broadcasts, and if you have been airing a continuous loop of inadequacy, you cannot expect to see a life of abundance on the screen of your reality. The shift from weak thinking to a mindset of power is not an event, but a grueling process of neurological restructuring that requires you to fire the narrator in your head and hire a visionary who is not afraid of the work required to build a new and formidable self. To break the habit of weak thinking, you must develop a radical intolerance for your own excuses, treating every self-depleting thought as a hostile invasion of your mental territory. This is a direct and analytical process that requires you to step outside of your emotions and look at your mental habits with the cold eyes of a forensic investigator. You must recognize that the feeling of being unqualified or unworthy is nothing more than a ghost in the machine, a residual signal from an old way of being that no longer serves your purpose. Strong people are not those who are free from negative thoughts. They are those who have mastered the art of ignoring the impulse to settle for less than they are capable of achieving. This reflective practice is the foundation of a new and resilient identity, one that is forged in the fires of conscious effort rather than the shadows of unconscious habit. You must begin to intentionally repeat the thoughts that represent the person you intend to become, even when they feel like a lie, until the repetition creates a new neurochemical reality. The mind is a muscle that must be broken down and rebuilt through the heavy lifting of uncomfortable truths and bold actions that defy your current self-image. You are standing at the crossroads of your own evolution, where the only thing standing between you and a life of profound influence is the practiced ease of your own self-doubt. The cycle of weak thinking ends the moment you decide that you would rather suffer the agony of growth than the dull ache of an unlived life. This is the reclamation of your cognitive sovereignty, a declaration of war against the mental habits that have kept you small, and the final realization that you have always possessed the power to rewrite the script. The silence that follows this decision is not the silence of fear, but the silence of a predator who has finally found their purpose and is ready to strike at the future with everything they have. The transition from a life of quiet desperation to one of unshakable power begins the moment you realize that the approval of others is a currency that has no value in the kingdom of your own soul. For years, you have been a beggar at the gates of other people's opinions, trading your authenticity for a handful of fleeting compliments and the hollow safety of being liked. This emotional dependency has acted as a leash on your potential, pulling you back every time you attempted to sprint toward a vision that the crowd could not understand. Approval seeking is not a social grace. It is a profound weakness that fragments your identity and leaves you at the mercy of people who are just as lost as you are. When you live for the validation of the world, you are handing over the remote control of your emotional state to a fickle and disinterested audience. This turning point arrives like a sudden silence in a crowded room, where the noise of expectations falls away and you are left standing in the raw reality of your own presence. It is the realization that you have been performing for a gallery that isn't even watching, sacrificing your unique, brilliance to satisfy a script you never even wrote. To stop seeking approval is to finally stop being a ghost in your own story and to begin the heavy, glorious work of inhabiting your own life. This is the death of the performer and the birth of the sovereign, a transformation that changes the very chemistry of your confidence. You no longer look to the horizon for permission because you have discovered that the only signature that matters is the one you write with your own actions. The moment you decide that being true to yourself is more important than being understood by the world, the chains of your insecurity simply dissolve into nothingness. Breaking the addiction to external validation is a surgical extraction of the self from the collective, a process that requires a brutal and beautiful commitment to your own internal stability. We are trained to believe that our worth is a social construct, a score that rises and falls based on the shifting winds of public favor or the digital metrics of a screen. This dependency creates a fragile and reactive identity, a self-image that can be shattered by a single critical comment or an indifferent silence. When you shift your focus from the external world to your internal foundation, you are building a fortress that no longer requires the permission of the world to exist. This internal stability is the hallmark of true mental strength, a quiet and immovable center that remains calm regardless of the storms raging outside. You begin to realize that the people you were so desperate to please were never the guardians of your destiny. They were merely distractions on the path to your own awakening. This shift is emotional and profound, as it demands that you face the terrifying loneliness of your own truth before you can experience the exhilaration of your own freedom. You are learning to provide for yourself the very things you used to beg for from strangers: respect, value, and the unwavering belief that you are enough exactly as you are. This is not about arrogance or isolation. It is about the reclamation of your psychological sovereignty, an act of defiance against a world that profits from your self-doubt. The energy you once wasted on managing perceptions is now redirected into the pursuit of mastery, turning you into a formidable force that can no longer be manipulated by the threat of rejection. You have finally found the courage to be the villain in a small story so that you can be the hero in a massive one. The moment you stop seeking approval, your entire perception of reality undergoes a radical and permanent expansion, revealing a landscape of opportunity that was previously hidden by the fog of fear. Hesitation, that old companion of the insecure, is replaced by a decisive and grounded clarity that allows you to move through the world with the weight of a mountain. You no longer filter your ideas through the lens of social acceptability, which means you are finally free to access the raw, unfiltered creativity that lives at the core of your being. This is the shift from performance to presence, where your actions are driven by internal values rather than external pressure. The opportunities you once missed because you were worried about being judged now become the very milestones of your success, as you are no longer afraid to be the only person in the room who believes in the vision. This newfound mental strength is not a loud or aggressive force. It is a steady, rhythmic pulse of self-reliance that informs every decision and every word. You find that your relationships change as well, as you stop attracting those who seek to control you through validation and start drawing in those who respect the integrity of your independence. There is a deep and resonant joy in the realization that you are no longer a slave to the fickle moods of the crowd, a sense of peace that can only be found when you have finally come home to yourself. You are no longer waiting for a seat at the table. You are building your own table, in your own house, according to your own rules. This is the ultimate empowerment, the moment when the silent enemy of insecurity is finally silenced by the deafening roar of your own self-approval. You have crossed the threshold into a life where your potential is limited only by the scale of your own imagination. Living as a person who is truly indifferent to the judgment of the world is the highest form of human maturity and the only way to leave a lasting mark on history. Strong people understand that to do anything of significance, you must be willing to be misunderstood, criticized, and even hated by those who are still trapped in the cage of conformity. This chapter of your life is about the final demolition of the ego's need to be liked, replacing it with the soul's need to be real. The transformation is complete when you can look directly into the eyes of your harshest critic and feel absolutely nothing but a sense of detached observation. Your identity is now forged in the fire of your own discipline and the ice of your own self-respect, a combination that makes you practically unbreakable in the face of adversity. This is the moment you reclaim your life from the committee of ghosts that has been running it for years, finally stepping into the light of your own authentic expression. The fear of judgment that once controlled your every move has been replaced by a fierce and focused commitment to your own growth, a trajectory that no longer requires the approval of a world that does not know your heart. You are the architect, the builder, and the sole inhabitant of your reality, and for the first time in your existence, you are truly free. This is the end of the search and the beginning of the reign, a state of being where your worth is a fixed and unshakable fact that requires no further evidence or external confirmation. The world may continue to judge, but you are no longer listening, because the voice inside you is now the only one that has the authority to speak. You have ended the war with your own reflection and discovered that the person you were always meant to be was simply waiting for you to stop asking for permission to arrive. The demolition of your self-respect was never a sudden explosion, but a slow and agonizing erosion caused by 1,000 tiny betrayals of your own soul. Every time you remained silent when you should have spoken, every time you accepted a standard of treatment that made your skin crawl, and every time you broke a promise to yourself in favor of a momentary comfort, you were handing over a piece of your dignity. Self-respect is the invisible scaffolding of the spirit, and when it is neglected, the entire structure of your identity begins to sag under the weight of your own self-contempt. You have likely spent years treating yourself with a level of cruelty you would never dream of inflicting on another human being, ignoring your own needs and silencing your own intuition until you became a stranger in your own mind. This internal damage is deep, manifesting as a hollow ache that no external achievement can truly fill because the foundation itself is compromised. You cannot build a life of power on a foundation of self-loathing, just as you cannot expect the world to honor a person who does not honor themselves. This chapter is the beginning of the salvage operation, a brutal and necessary assessment of the wreckage you have allowed to accumulate in the name of being agreeable or safe. Rebuilding from zero requires you to stop looking for excuses and start looking at the cold, hard facts of how you have participated in your own diminishment. The first step toward reclamation is the admission that you have been your own worst enemy, and that the rescue mission you have been waiting for is one you must lead yourself. Respect is not something that is given. It is something that is maintained through the uncompromising standards you set for your own conduct and the boundaries you refuse to let anyone cross. The reconstruction of your identity begins with the installation of boundaries that act as the high-security walls for your new and developing self-worth. You must realize that a boundary is not a wall to keep people out, but a gate that determines what kind of energy you are willing to host within your own life. Rebuilding self-respect from the ashes requires you to become a relentless gatekeeper of your time, your emotions, and your physical space, refusing to negotiate with anything that seeks to devalue your presence. This process is often lonely and uncomfortable because it demands that you prune away the relationships and habits that were built on the old, broken version of yourself. You are teaching the world how to treat you by demonstrating exactly what you will no longer tolerate, and the initial resistance you face from others is simply proof that your new standards are working. Awareness is the light that reveals where the leaks in your self-esteem have been occurring, allowing you to plug them with the concrete of firm, unwavering decisions. You are no longer interested in being the person who makes everyone else comfortable at the expense of your own peace. This is the birth of a healthy selfishness, a protective instinct that recognizes that your first and most important responsibility is to the integrity of your own character. As you begin to say no to the things that drain you, you will find an incredible reservoir of energy that can finally be used to build a life that reflects your true values. Every time you uphold a boundary, you are depositing a coin of respect into the bank of your soul, slowly building the wealth of a self-image that can no longer be easily shaken. The world will eventually reflect the image you hold of yourself, but you must be the first one to believe in the value of the person standing in the mirror. Discipline is the ultimate act of self-love because it is the only way to prove to your subconscious that you are a person of your word. When you have lost all respect for yourself, your promises have become empty rituals, and your goals have become nothing more than taunts from a future you don't believe you deserve. To rebuild from zero, you must start with small, non-negotiable commitments that you honor with the ferocity of a sacred vow. Whether it is waking up at a certain hour, completing a difficult task, or simply choosing a healthier thought, these micro-victories are the bricks that will form the new monument of your self-respect. You are training your brain to trust you again, overcoming the habitual impulse to quit when things get difficult or uncomfortable. This is the heavy lifting of identity reconstruction, a daily practice of choosing the long-term vision over the short-term impulse. Discipline is not a punishment. It is the framework of freedom that allows you to move through the world with the quiet confidence of someone who knows they can rely on themselves. As you stack these days of integrity together, the narrative of your inadequacy begins to lose its power, replaced by a tangible history of resilience and follow-through. You are no longer a victim of your moods or your environment. You are the captain of a ship that is finally being steered with intention and grit. This restoration of self-value is a slow and deliberate process, but it is the only path that leads to a life of genuine influence and unshakable inner peace. You are proving to yourself, one action at a time, that you are worthy of the space you occupy and the dreams you are pursuing. The strength you are building in the shadows will eventually become the light that guides you through the greatest challenges of your life, provided you never stop showing up for yourself. The final realization of this rebuilding process is the understanding that the respect you receive from the world is always a lagging indicator of the respect you have for yourself. You can never truly convince others of your worth if you are still carrying the secret shame of self-betrayal in your heart. When you finally arrive at a place of genuine self-reverence, you move with a different weight and speak with a different resonance that commands attention without ever having to ask for it. This is not a performance or a mask. It is the natural radiation of a soul that has been tested in the fire of self-discipline and emerged whole. People will notice the shift in your energy long before they hear the change in your words, sensing that you are no longer a person who can be easily swayed or manipulated by external opinions. You have become the ultimate authority in your own life, and that level of certainty is both terrifying and attractive to those who are still seeking direction. The journey from zero to total self-respect is the most difficult path you will ever walk, but it is also the only one that leads to a destination worth reaching. You have learned how to turn your emotional wounds into structural reinforcements, using the lessons of your past to ensure that you never allow yourself to be diminished again. The version of you that was once a beggar for approval has been replaced by a sovereign who is focused on the work of mastery and the pursuit of a legacy that outlasts the noise of the moment. You have ended the war with your own reflection and discovered that the person you were always meant to be was simply waiting for you to stop apologizing for your existence. The mirror now reflects a person of substance, a person of depth, and most importantly, a person who finally knows exactly what they are worth. The silence of your own self-respect is now the loudest thing in the room, and the world has no choice but to listen. The alchemy of the human spirit is most potent in the moments when you are standing amidst the wreckage of your own suffering, deciding whether to be buried by the debris or to use it as the foundation for a fortress. Pain is the most misunderstood energy in existence, often viewed as a signal to retreat when it is actually a profound invitation to expand your capacity for resilience. You have been conditioned to avoid discomfort at all costs, treating every emotional wound as a permanent disability rather than the raw material for a more formidable version of yourself. When you stop running from the ache of your insecurities and begin to look directly into the fire, you discover that pain has a unique way of stripping away the trivial and the false. It acts as a cognitive abrasive, wearing down the polished masks of your ego until only the indestructible core of your character remains. This is where true mental strength is forged, not in the shallow waters of easy success, but in the crushing depths of the abyss where you are forced to find your own light. Suffering, when met with awareness instead of avoidance, becomes a teacher of unparalleled depth, granting you a level of emotional intelligence that the comfortable can never possess. You are learning that the scars on your soul are not marks of shame, but the reinforced structural joints of a mind that has been tested by the extreme and refused to break. This transformative process requires a radical shift in perspective, moving from the identity of a victim who is haunted by the past to the stance of a warrior who uses the heat of their own trauma to temper the steel of their resolve. The very thing that was meant to destroy you is now the source of your most unshakable power. Trauma is a heavy burden to carry, but in the hands of a disciplined mind, it becomes a high-octane fuel that powers a level of focus and clarity that the average person cannot comprehend. Strong people do not possess a magical immunity to agony. They simply refuse to let their suffering go to waste, extracting every possible drop of wisdom and drive from their darkest hours. When your life has been touched by profound rejection or loss, you develop a visceral understanding of what is truly at stake, which creates a natural immunity to the petty distractions that drain the energy of the masses. Your pain becomes a clarifying lens, sharpening your vision until you can see through the illusions of social approval and the empty promises of comfort. This is the birth of a relentless focus, a state where the urgency of your healing drives you toward a level of mastery that others find intimidating. You are no longer working for the applause of the crowd. You are working to honor the person who survived the storm. This transformation of emotional energy into mental clarity is the ultimate hack for human potential, turning the weight of your history into the momentum of your future. You begin to appreciate the struggle because it has gifted you with a depth of character and a breadth of perspective that could never be found in a life of ease. The resilience you have built is not a defensive shield, but a proactive force, a dynamic stability that allows you to walk through fire and come out the other side with a heart that is even more open and a mind that is even more sharp. Your past is no longer a prison. It is the laboratory where you have mastered the art of turning leaden despair into the golden light of a purpose that cannot be extinguished by any external force. The depth of your emotional scars is the exact measure of the emotional height you are capable of reaching, provided you have the courage to stop treating your pain as an enemy and start treating it as an architect. Suffering shapes the contours of your awareness, creating a complex and beautiful internal landscape that allows you to experience life with a richness and intensity that was previously impossible. Most people live on the surface of their own existence, terrified of the shadows, but you have walked through the valley and discovered that the shadows are where the most profound truths are hidden. This emotional depth is what gives you the ability to lead with empathy, to speak with authority, and to stand with a presence that demands respect without saying a word. You have realized that the crushing pressure of your insecurities was actually the universe trying to create a diamond out of the coal of your potential. This resilience is not a static state of being, but a continuous process of breaking and healing, each cycle leaving you stronger and more flexible than the last. You are no Boris. You are a masterpiece in progress, and the chisel of pain is only removing the parts of you that were never meant to be there. The mental strength you now possess is a quiet, rhythmic pulse that informs every decision, a reminder that because you have already survived the worst, you are now prepared for anything. You have found a source of energy that is independent of the world's opinion, a self-sustaining fire that burns brighter the more challenges you throw into it. This is the true meaning of transformation. The moment when you realize that your greatest liability has become your most valuable asset, and that you would not trade a single second of your struggle for 1,000 years of unearned peace. The final stage of turning pain into mental strength is the realization that your suffering was the necessary initiation into a life of profound influence and unshakable inner peace. You are no longer afraid of the dark because you have learned how to build a sun inside your own chest using the very fragments of your broken heart. Strong people end their insecurities not by forgetting the pain, but by integrating it so completely that it becomes the bedrock of their self-respect. You move through the world with a groundedness that is visible to everyone you meet, a sense of gravity that comes from having navigated the most difficult terrain of the human experience. This is the moment you reclaim your narrative, turning a story of survival into a saga of triumph that inspires everyone who hears it. The discipline you have cultivated is not a burden, but a privilege, a way to channel the immense power of your realized self into the creation of a legacy that reflects your true worth. You have ended the war with your past and discovered that every battle was a lesson, every wound was a gateway, and every tear was an investment in the formidable person you have become. The silent enemy of insecurity has been replaced by the roaring engine of a purpose-driven life, a trajectory that is no longer limited by the fears of the person you used to be. You are free, not because the pain has disappeared, but because you have finally become big enough to carry it with grace and use it to light the way for others who are still lost in the dark. This is the end of the book and the beginning of your reign, a life where your potential is infinite and your spirit is unbreakable. You have turned your pain into power, and in doing so, you have finally found the strength to live as the masterpiece you were always meant to be. The arrival at the final stage of your transformation is marked not by a loud declaration of victory, but by a profound and heavy silence that settles over the battlefield of your mind. To become the person who no longer cares is to achieve the ultimate form of psychological sovereignty, where the opinions, whispers, and judgments of the world fall away like rain off the wings of a bird in flight. You have finally reached a state of emotional independence where your identity is no longer a collaborative project between you and society, but a private monument built to your own specifications. For the first time in your existence, the internal radar that used to scan for approval has been deactivated, replaced by a steady and unshakable core of self-certainty. This is the death of the social hostage, the version of you that lived in a state of perpetual apology for taking up space or having a voice. You move through the world with a new kind of gravity, a presence that is felt before it is seen, because you are no longer leaking energy in a desperate attempt to be understood or liked. This detachment is not a cold withdrawal from humanity, but a warm and grounded immersion into your own truth, providing you with a clarity that the insecure can only dream of possessing. You have stopped looking into the eyes of others to find your own reflection, realizing that the only mirror that matters is the one you carry within your own conscience. The world has lost its power to hurt you because it has lost its power to define you. And in that vacuum of external control, a magnificent and terrifying freedom has taken root. You are finally the master of your own internal weather, standing at the center of a calm that no storm of public opinion can ever hope to disturb. This state of inner completion is often mistaken for arrogance by those who are still trapped in the cage of comparison, but in reality, it is the most profound form of humility. To no longer care about judgment is to admit that the ego's thirst for recognition was a hollow pursuit that led only to the exhaustion of the spirit. True confidence is not a loud or aggressive force. It is the quiet, rhythmic pulse of a person who knows exactly who they are and requires no external evidence to prove it. You have cultivated an emotional control that is so refined it feels like a physical law, allowing you to observe the reactions of others with a sense of detached compassion rather than reactive fear. Your stability is no longer a fragile construction of social success, but a deep-rooted architectural fact that remains immovable regardless of the shifting sands of cultural trends or personal betrayals. This is the moment of mental freedom where you realize that the chains of your insecurity were made of smoke and shadows, held together only by your own belief in their solidity. You are now free to expend your energy on the work that actually matters, the pursuit of mastery, and the cultivation of a life that is truly worth living. The noise of the world hasn't disappeared, but it has been relegated to the background, a distant static that no longer has the frequency to disrupt the symphony of your own thoughts. You have achieved a level of self-defined identity that is so robust it acts as a filter for everything that enters your life, ensuring that only the truth is allowed to stay. This is the peace that surpasses all understanding, the quiet satisfaction of a person who has finally come home to themselves after a lifetime of searching in the wrong places for a sense of belonging. The liberation of the self from the tyranny of the spectator is the final and most necessary act of your evolution, a psychological finale that sets the stage for a life of unlimited potential. When you stop caring about how you are perceived, you finally gain access to the raw, unedited version of your own genius, the part of you that was suppressed by the fear of being too much or not enough. This emotional independence creates a vacuum of power that you are now free to fill with your own values, your own ambitions, and your own uncompromising vision for the future. You have broken the cycle of validation addiction, replacing the frantic search for likes and nods with the steady, quiet hum of a soul that is finally at rest. This is not a destination where you stop growing, but a new starting point from which you can grow without the distortion of external pressure. You are no longer performing for a jury. You are creating for an audience of one, and that purity of intent is what will eventually draw the right people to your side. The mental freedom you now enjoy is a state of perpetual flow, where action follows thought without the interference of doubt or the friction of second-guessing. You have become a force of nature, a person whose decisions are made in the cold light of objective reality rather than the flickering shadows of social anxiety. This is the end of the struggle and the beginning of the reign, a state of being where your worth is a fixed and unshakable constant that requires no further confirmation from a world that was never meant to hold your spirit. You have claimed your seat at the table of the powerful, not by asking for permission, but by realizing that the table was always yours, and the only thing missing was the person you have finally become. As you close this chapter and step into the light of your new reality, remember that the person you used to be was simply a necessary cocoon for the formidable being you are today. The insecurities that once threatened to kill you have been incinerated in the fire of your own awakening, leaving behind a version of yourself that is practically indestructible. You are no longer a victim of your past, your parents, your peers, or your own biological impulses. You are the deliberate architect of a future that is as vast and bright as your own imagination. The journey of ending your insecurities has led you to the most beautiful realization of all, that you were always the person you were waiting for, and that the power you were seeking was already vibrating in your veins. You move forward now with a heart that is wide open and a mind that is perfectly still, ready to face the challenges of the world with the calm and focused intensity of a predator who has finally found their purpose. This is the final stage of your emotional independence, the moment when you look into the abyss and the abyss looks back and finds absolutely nothing to hold on to. You have become the person who no longer cares because you have become the person who finally knows, and that knowledge is the ultimate weapon against the darkness. The silent enemy is dead, the war is over, and the kingdom of your life is finally under your own command, live with the intensity of a star that is fueled by its own light, and never again allow the shadows of a small world to dim the brilliance of your original spirit. You are finished with the search, you are finished with the apology, and you are finally ready to live. The silence that follows this realization is not the end of the story, but the beginning of a magnificent silence in which your true life will finally be heard.